Good morning and welcome to UMA on the Hill. I'm Todd Bingham, President and CEO of the Utah Manufacturers Association. I'm pleased to have with me today two of my really good friends and fellow lobbyists, Kate Bradshaw from Holland Hart and Billy Hesterman, also from the law firm of Holland Hart. The three of us probably have seen more of each other in the last 45 days than we want to. The 45-day legislative session is often described as a family reunion that goes on just a couple days too long. Weeks, could be weeks, definitely could be weeks. So excited to be here with you today and give you kind of a recap, a wrap up of what happened during the legislative session. And I've asked Kate and Billy to come in and help me and talk about the process, the sausage making, if you will. The famous quotes right now seem to be the Hamilton quote of the room where it happened, or rooms where it happened, hallways, all of that. So the text messages, the hard granite floors where we stand around and do our business. So again, the 2022 legislative session just recently ended on Friday, the 4th of March at midnight. And so we've had a little bit of an opportunity to get just a little bit of a breather. And I brought Billy and Kate in because they've got a lot of history and background in different areas on legislative issues. And so maybe let's just start out with introduce yourself a little bit so our millions of viewers know who we're talking to today. So Kate, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, so this just completed my 17th legislative session. In my background, I've spent time as a legislative staffer, have worked for the Republican Party, have spent time working as the vice president of the Food and Retail Association. So, closely aligned with manufacturing, and have been with the law firm of Holland Hart for the last 8 years running their government affairs program. And it's
been 8 years. Holy cow.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Time flies.
And in my spare time, I have what I affectionately call a city council side hustle. So I serve in local government. So it's state government by day, local government by night.
Yeah. Well, we might want to get your head checked after this, but thanks for being here, and we'll talk a little bit about local and city government with Kate's experience there. Billy, give us your background.
She's hiding her superhero government cape.
Right. There you go.
Today, her sweater. Billy Hesterman, this completed my 13th session on the Hill in various roles, just like Kate. I was a legislative staffer for a year, and then as a reporter for a number of years, and then in various roles with the Utah Taxpayers Association, and now with Holland Hart. So it's been a wild ride, but I really enjoy the Capitol and the session, and I find the energy of it to be invigorating. The session is one of my favorite times of the year, even though it's my wife and my kids' least favorite time of the year.
We all say goodbye to our significant other for 45 days, and now we're back a little bit. So this year marks my 27th session, and I would say this, and you guys I think would agree, the last couple during the pandemic have been very interesting. Perhaps not interesting, not in a good sense. It can be a challenge. It can be a real challenge. The process of the legislature and doing what we do in lobbying and representing manufacturing companies and clients is challenging to begin with, right? I mean, it's a 45-day session. And Kate, I mean, how does that differ from other states around us?
So Utah has the shortest constitutional session of any of the 50 states. We meet for 45 days. That's actually only 33 working days. So we are very, very short and fast. Now, other states do things a little bit differently. Every state really has a unique system. Some states like California, meet essentially full-time like Congress. But, some of our neighboring states like Nevada, for instance, every other year.
60 days, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Every other day.
Every other year.
Right.
Wyoming does a short session and then a long session every other year. So they have a budget specific session, and then they'll have an issue specific session. So everyone does it a little bit differently. We do it short and fast. It's 7 weeks. And as you mentioned, because of the way our session is short and fast and everything has to happen in those that time frame, you have to be, as I call it, present to win. So you have
Yeah.
to be at the Capitol. You have to be engaged because the process will not wait for you.
Right.
And so it does become a system where, um, to be effective, you need someone who's constantly there, which is where Billy and I come in, and where you come in
Right.
as an association, is being constantly present to engage in the process.
Yeah, we've got a graphic we're going to show, or we may be showing right now, but that talks about the general session and talks about, again, how many bills get introduced and how the process works so quickly. As you indicated, you miss 2 or 3 days, that you're not on the Hill, your bill could be anywhere in the process.
Yes. So the one of the graphs we wanted to show, this is, it shows kind of the political nerd side. We enjoy this. But we've been tracking for a while the number of bills that are introduced. And on the graph, you'll see, an interesting spike in the 2020 session. Of course, the session starts before the pandemic hits. And as you look at coming into that session, it was about tax reform, significant discussions about tax reform in the state of Utah, sales tax on services. And so a lot of bills were filed, the most we've ever seen filed. And then, of course, it crashes in 2021, our pandemic session, in the middle of the pandemic, with the least bills filed. This year, there were 814 bills that were introduced. But you can see the yellow line on the graph. That's the number of bills that are passed. And what I always find super interesting is that really what you can accomplish in a 45-day session is about plus or minus 500 bills. That's the carrying capacity of our session. This year, 513 bills passed.
For better or for worse, right?
Better or for worse. And some
Yeah.
of those are necessary. Some of those are the checks the state has to write to fund government.
Sure.
So if you want to give money to public education, you have to pass that in a bill in order to direct where it goes. And so, there's probably 20 or so bills that are writing the checks of government for the next year, but then the rest are changes.
Right. And Billy, I mean, I know you've dealt with this before. One of the advantages and disadvantages of a 45-day session, 33 working days, as Kate indicated, at least legislative working days. we know we work all weekend anyway, but on bills, but is that a piece of legislation, generally speaking, unless it's what Kate referred to as a budgetary fiscal implication type of a bill, to get a bill through in 45 days, you kind of have to do some work outside of the session.
Right. It's the process is set up to be hard. It's
Right.
set up for a law, to make a law, for that to be hard. You have to go to a committee, you have to have a floor vote, you have to go to the other side of the building and have a committee and a floor vote, and then have the governor agree to it. And that does take, you would think, oh, that should take a week. But just with so many bills, as Kate's talked about, that get introduced and get considered, it just slows the process down. And then to have all the sides come together and give input and have, the different things that come into place of which committee did you get placed in and where are you on that list of priorities to get agenda'd. It's really interesting process, and it makes sure that really the stuff that needs to happen happens, and the stuff that maybe needs to wait or isn't the best idea falls by the wayside. It's really a good process that we have set up.
Right. No, and I've often said that, I mean, it should be tough for a reason. I mean, as Kate indicated, there are bills we ought to pass every year that keep things operating. Then there are bills that we ought to spend more time on. We really ought to. And if a bill has been worked on through the interim committee meetings all throughout the rest of the year, then, as we say, maybe it's ready for prime time, maybe it's not. If it is, it typically worked through there. So you're constantly looking at the clock. From day one, you're thinking the clock ends midnight, day 45, and that's not very far away, right? So, with a citizen legislature, I think that's important, that sometimes it's harder to pass a bill. That's where we come in as lobbyists as well. And maybe a lot of our folks don't understand exactly how that works, but, being a citizen legislature, many of the individuals who run for political office have some experience and knowledge in a specific set of skills in an area, but don't have a depth and breadth of knowledge in a lot of areas. So, I mean, that's one where we're able to come in and say, on manufacturing, we are that resource. And we're certainly not the only voice in their ear. But we certainly are talking to them about why this is good for business or why this might hurt business from an economic development standpoint, from a city standpoint, from a tax policy standpoint, all of those things. So
I think that really highlights how important an association like the Manufacturers Association is, though, is that you are able to be there and be that voice in their ear
yeah,
and educate them, because there are a lot of legislators that they're lawyers, doctors, small business owners, or they're just, someone at a tech company and they're mid-level management. They don't know what your process is like, but when you're able to say, hey, Senator, let me sit down with you. I don't necessarily want to talk to you about this bill in particular, but let me help you understand how our processes work and how that bill will impact us. And that's so key to the process, so that they really get it. And I think that's why they're, what you do is valuable, and what so many of the others that are up there do is
Oh,
valuable.
and even your clients, like our members, their heads are down making things right. And if they're not doing, they're not making money. And so this is a part of that sausage making that most people don't want to be involved in. We're the political nerds that we do enjoy that, and it is a process. So Kate, talk just a little bit more about how that process, if we go into that seven weeks, and how things really ramp up.
Yeah. So Billy mentioned, and if you've seen, that PBS cartoon that a lot of us grew up with I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. The basic process is the same, whether you're at the federal level or the state level. You introduce a bill, it starts with a committee hearing. If it passes that level, then it goes to the floor for a vote. It switches chambers, repeats the process. We prepared a graph to show what it looks like in Utah's 7-week session. How many bills are passed each week when they arrive on the governor's desk for his consideration. In our world, we live by some important numbers. We need 38 votes out of the House, 15 votes out of the Senate, and we need the governor to sign it. So 38, 15, and 1. Those are our numbers to get to success. And as we talked about, we have all these bills that are introduced, but really you know that only about 500 are going to pass. So you want to be one of those lucky 500 that are going to make it through. So there are tricks of the trade to helping bills get through the process faster, using the interim committee process, picking strong sponsors, working the committee agenda and the chairman to make sure it goes early on in the session. Towards the end of the session, there are priority bill lists that go through, things like that. But the second chart we prepared shows just how fast things move and how important that final week is, because that's when over half of the bills pass. So of that 500, 250-ish of them are going to pass in that final week of the session.
Right.
And it can be really critical to be engaged in that process. Billy and I, just by way of example, we had a bill we were working on for a client who uses waste tires in their kiln process. And
member of ours.
Yes. And so this bill dealt with that reimbursement process for being a tire recycler.
Sure. Right.
And the bill ended up, it was well positioned the last day. It made it 3/4 of the way through. So we were waiting that final floor vote in the Senate, well positioned to pass early the last day, which is, by the way, it goes until midnight. Computers automatically shut off on them right at the stroke of midnight, sort of like, Cinderella and turning back into a pumpkin. And there was an amendment made to our bill, really unrelated. It dealt with municipal landfills.
This is in the Senate.
This is on the Senate side. And
which means
it was going to have to go back for concurrence.
Yeah. So what does that mean? That means if you passed a bill in one body in the House and it looks like this, and it goes over to the Senate and they pass the bill and they add something to it and it looks like this, then it has to go back to the other body so that the other body, the House, can vote on it, on what was proposed. So you're just adding time to the process. Clock's ticking.
Adding time to the process as the clock is ticking down. And what's interesting, and there are pros and cons to a short session.
Right.
One of the pros is that it forces parties, because of the pressures of the clock, to reach compromise or have to wait for another year to work on your issue again. So it forces parties to compromise. One of the cons is sometimes when we do things fast, we don't always get it right. So this amendment that was inserted dealing with the municipal landfill issue ended up being so broad, it brought in many more entities than they thought it was going to happen. So as this bill was going to go back for concurrence and they realized this problem, a concurrence vote would say, hey, we agree to those changes.
Right.
Go ahead, send it to the governor. But because Now there was a problem.
Right.
The House had to refuse to
No,
concur.
no, we don't like it. Right.
Yeah, so we had to have a motion to refuse to concur. That sends it back to the Senate. Senate has the option, recede from your amendments
Right.
or go to a conference committee.
Right.
In a conference committee, you see those.
6 people get together
Yeah.
and they hammer it out. Right.
They nominate, 3 from one chamber, 3
Right.
from the other, and they're supposed to go see if they can find a compromise. You see these, a
Right.
handful of them on the last day, usually only on the last day.
Mhm.
So there had to be a conference committee to narrow this extra amendment, unrelated.
Again,
tick,
tick,
tick, tick, tick,
tick,
tick.
watching
Our
the clock.
client is watching the clock. We're watching the clock. So the conference committee came up with a more narrow compromise. They adopted it. It went through. So we had anticipated passage of our bill on the probably at about, I don't know, 10 o'clock on the last day, 10 a.m. And instead our bill finally had its passage closer to around just after, I think, the dinner break, closer to around 7 p.m. So that last day could be very, very stressful. And if you're not constantly on it to watch,
Right.
then you might miss it. And that's why when you see this chart with the ramp up to that week 7 is an all hands on deck event because of the way our session works.
Kind of like a maze that you're looking at, and the bill is in the maze. And there's really only one way to pass a bill, which you said is 38, 15, and 1. And so that bill is kind of working its way through the maze. And you're thinking, oh, we're there. And at the last second, it takes the wrong turn.
We've turned into
and
a
you're
blind
like,
dead end.
no, turn around and go back and go this way. And so you're right. I mean, I love this graph about how the process works, because it is so true that it is a must be present to win type of a scenario. And my wife always jokes with me that she says that during the session, I become kind of a glass is half empty type of a person, because we're fearful that something is going to pass that perhaps is not good in our case for manufacturing companies, or that someone is behind the scenes working against you. And so in some cases you become paranoid a little bit, and when the clock is ticking, this is not, well, I can get across the finish line whenever I get across the finish line. No, this is if my bill happens to be going to be heard after 3 more bills and it's 11:55, it might just die, and we got to bring it back again next year. It happens all the time.
Yeah,
right?
we've had for clients where we have been the last bill that has passed,
Mhm.
and in the Senate they do a roll call vote alphabetically, and you're just urging them to get through the alphabet faster, and so we've had that just tremendous
Mhm.
stress and then relief when our bill is the last one to pass
Right.
before the clock locks at midnight. And then we did have one year where we had to have a bill go back for a concurrence vote, and they got halfway through the roll call, midnight struck, the computers locked,
And the bill
and we
died.
had to wait a whole nother year, and it was painful. So the
Right.
tyranny of the clock is a real factor in the Utah session.
Right. It's an interesting process. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that with folks, because I think, for most of you, maybe you don't care. But I have said to folks that either as a business owner, you get into politics or get out of business. Politics affects your business on a daily basis. And it may not be something that you love. It might be something that you actually hate. However, one of the key things that, as Billy alluded to, that associations do, and that many of our law firms have clients that they're protecting their interests on a broad array of topics. And this is just one of those things that probably is where we were founded as an organization 117 years ago. It's what we became, was that voice for industry. And that's what we do. So let's dive into a couple of issues. Let's talk budget first. Maybe we'll scare to death people with looking at some of those numbers, but we've got a graph we're going to throw up on the screen as well that is kind of a synopsis of the budget. But Billy, walk us through a little bit the budget numbers. You're the former tax guy, still a numbers guy. Dumb this down for us a little bit.
I mean, this is how I really attract people to me at parties, as I say, let's talk about government funding. and let me really tell you how it all works. And they rally to it. They
It's
want to
just,
be
you were
there.
just like, you were just killing it in college.
Yeah,
weren't you?
let me
Just
tell
killing
you.
it.
But this year really was an impressive year as far as budget numbers. Utah passed its largest budget that they've ever had. $25 billion was what was in the budget. I can remember. I mean, I really believe that one of my first sessions, we were at like 13 or 14 billion. So to see how much we've increased over this time, and granted, some of that is due to the federal stimulus money that we've seen over the
Right.
last couple of years. But how much Utah has been able to grow and the services they've been able to provide and the quality of life we're enjoying because of what they've done, we really have to acknowledge that and really, give a good pat on the back to our lawmakers and governor over these past years of how well they've done and how much success we've seen.
And before you dive into that, I just want to remind our members of our organization that, while this is government budgeting, our state has very commonly been recognized as the best fiscally managed state in the country, and we've done really well. We did fabulously in 08 and 09 because of rainy day funds that we'd set aside and things like that. So our legislature does a phenomenal job in being fiscally conservative. And it's one of the reasons that we are successful as a state in maintaining a good business climate. So.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I think that also we have to look at just the recent pandemic and what we've been through with that. There was a lot of pressure to use rainy day funds, and a lot of call of if this isn't a rainy day, what is?
Right?
And
right.
they barely dipped into those funds and kind of just bet on the economy of Utah and bet on the businesses of Utah to find a way to rally through the pandemic. And
we did.
Boy, did they.
Yep.
So also a good job to everyone out there, all the businesses, all the companies, different, creative minds that have been out there that found a way to get us through. And hopefully we're now getting more on the other side of this.
Feeling
Fingers
like it,
crossed
right?
that we're there. But as far as highlights from that budget, that massive 25 billion, it's hard to say with a B of money that we were able to spend this year. Some of the highlights from it, a 9% increase to public education. That's one of the bigger increases that we've ever seen.
Right.
Over nearly $400 million of new money put into that.
Generally, that kind of hovers right around the 5%, right? 4.5, 5, 6% WPU.
Keeping pace with inflation is usually kind of just all they aim at.
9% is a big deal, right?
And when you bring up the WPU, which is that basic per student-ish number that we have, it was a 6% increase this year, and then they had the other 9% or 3% to get to 9 is just the different programs that they funded.
Right.
But just a great investment that we're giving to education. Now, Kate and I are both our spouses are school teachers, so we might say you can do a little more. But also we do recognize
My son's a school teacher, so I kind of say the same thing.
So we do recognize that we have a lot of kids. We have a really large public education system here in the state of Utah. To do more, it's going to cost a whole lot more and come at the expense of maybe some of the other programs that we really do enjoy here in the state. We did spend $15 million for funding housing preservation, $55 million for homelessness to help tackle the issue that's here. That I hate to say it, we kind of joke sometimes. Kate and I worked on the homelessness issue that I'm like, oh, you solved it. It's done. But this is an issue that won't.
It's ongoing.
It's ongoing. It's going to be something
Right.
that we'll
It's
have
complicated.
to tackle every year. $1 billion for transportation infrastructure.
Right.
Huge investment as we're seeing the growth that the state is having. And, the credit to, I believe Representative Schultz was the big leader on this to get that funding in there. He's seeing where we're going and seeing that we're going to need to be prepared for our growth. Make sure everyone needs to get where they need to go.
Right.
Keep this economy.
Well, and
humming.
some of those numbers, just to dive into that just a little bit more on the 1 billion. I mean, you had 721 million in state road projects, and we know that the state symbol is the orange cone. That's it kind of feels like that when we get into that, but let's remember that typically is a very good indication of where our economy is going. Right, is the need for transportation. Certainly our manufacturers understand the need to get goods and to market, and so transportation is a big deal for us.
Goods to market, people to jobs.
Right. Transit projects. I mean, we invested 150 million in transit projects, including double tracking of Front Runner. I think there's 75 million going to that. So a lot of this is as we grow as a state and become less bedroom community, full on 100% commuter communities that we start to look at transit. And again, Kate, this statistic, I believe what's the percentage? 75-80% of the people that live in Davis County don't work in Davis County and commute out of the county.
There's, we have built these different hubs. For a long time it was just Salt Lake, right? Then you had a little bit of Ogden, maybe a little bit of Layton.
Right.
Now you've got your kind of secondary hub at the south end of Salt Lake County, with all the growth of Silicon Slopes,
north end of Davis County, right into Ogden. So,
but we're
intriguing.
We are still moving people to their jobs. So you have your suburban communities that kind of empty in the day as people go other places. Now, pandemic has taught us new ways of being able to do a lot of things, and so we may see some of that shift. But at least in the near term, now that we're all anxious to get back to offices, you've got to travel to get there. So either by car or by some type of transit method.
It's not fun, but boy, as I travel around the state, and was on Mountain View Corridor or Bangor Highway last night, and the work that they've done through that, and the new Mountain View Corridor headed all the way into downtown. Those things from an industrial standpoint, just talking industrially for our companies that are along those corridors in the Salt Lake Valley, let alone up north and in Utah County, we're making good progress on that. And it is some heartache when you see the cones, but I think again, the juice will be worth the squeeze on that when we get to the end of the road.
So one of the most interesting budget things, especially because the three of us are all native Utahns, we were little ones when the Great Salt Lake was at its highest level ever in 1986 after the floods of '83. But one of the big budget rocks that took place was the emphasis on the Great Salt Lake this year. $40 million spent on that item.
Right, and there's two significant kind of plays with the Great Salt Lake. One is obviously wildlife and kind of the ecological side of the lake, and then the other side is the extraction industry. And many of our companies that are members of our organizations are involved in the extraction industry, whether it be brine shrimp or whether it be sulfate of potash or many of those other individual minerals and products that are millions and millions and millions of dollars. So and then you've got the air quality side, which is one of the discussions that they're looking at is the water continues to drop, what happens if more and more of the lake is dry, and what will that do to air quality? They always refer to Owens Lake as a California lake that dried up, and they had significant PM10 levels. One of the things that's helped Utah with that is the brine and the salt crust across the top that tends to help dust from really taking off. But we do see it, right? We certainly see that issue. So investing $40 million in that is a big deal. It's a huge economic driver for Utah.
Yeah, and the idea there is to create a water trust to help water rights be secured and allow the beneficial use of that water to be reaching a terminal lake with no other kind of goal than just filling that lake back up. So
well, and as you indicated, second driest state in the nation, we're always talking water. We're always talking about water, and our companies use water on a daily basis, and so some more than others, but it is certainly something we keep our arms around. So give us a few other things. What else we got on budget real quick?
Well, we did have the tax cut that was put into the session this year, $193 million tax cut for Utahns. Lowered the income tax rate for corporations and individuals from 4.95 to 4.85.
Right.
So a little bit of a change, and ends up when you break it down by month, about 10, 15 bucks, maybe a month. But hey, we will all take extra money in our pockets, right?
Well, and I think our goal as an organization and as business has always been, how do we lower that corporate tax rate, right? How do we, and we're doing that piece by piece. We would love to continue to drive that downward. And Billy, why is tax policy so complicated in Utah? Not complicated, I shouldn't say that, but we kind of have a three-legged stool for tax policy.
Right.
And what are those three legs?
So we build our tax policy here in Utah based on the income tax, the sales tax, and the property tax, our three legs that we like to call it. And when we, most of the local governments and education are funded by that property tax element, and then also sales tax. And then the income tax mostly is a state level funding, which actually had an interesting change for itself. We usually call the income tax the education fund. And we had a bill this session that passed this year that now wants to change the name of the education fund to the income tax fund. So we'll see what that play is for later on. No move is made just for fun. They're all strategic. So we'll let everyone use their creative minds on what might be in the future of why making that name change. But when we are able to diversify our tax base, that makes revenue more consistent for government. So you're not dependent on one form of that, one leg of that stool. When you're using all of it, it helps maintain everything, keep it in a stable place, keep it predictable. And that's what makes government successful.
And Utah's complicated in that way just a little bit because 68% of our land is publicly owned. Therefore, our property tax base is lesser than what other states are that have more private lands. And so when you start having the discussion or the dialogue about, well, let's remove sales tax on food, one of the reasons that as an organization we might be concerned about that is that as you have those three legs, if you shorten one of the legs, then you're going to have to adapt that. And so if you start to lose some sales tax, then you've got to increase potentially a tax in another place to offset that. And so it's that balance between having those sources. And again, just simply put on a property tax side, we can't generate a lot of tax on that side. And so when the sales tax is really good, the economy is really good, our sales tax is soaring, which it is right now, right? Income tax is soaring because we have a lot of jobs. When those start to change a little bit, then I think that's a nod to our legislature, who does a very good job of understanding how that works and trying to keep it fair for everyone.
And Billy, makes the joke about that tax policy, isn't always like the cocktail conversation everyone wants to have because it's numbers and it's math and it's complicated. But without a deep understanding of the tax system, you really can't drive policy. And, it's interesting to me, early, if we all recall very early in the pandemic, right? When we first were staying home and thinking about what we needed to do to wait this thing out. And we all snatched up all the toilet paper and all the bottled water and all those things. And we cut, we absolutely cut our spending on eating out, on tourism, services, vacations, all those things. Everyone was preparing for different things. And so that swung budgets for a little while in interesting and weird ways. And then of course you see this, everything come back in different ways where, people were so excited to go stay at an Airbnb and different things like that. So, as government looks at, sales tax in particular, what do those shifts look like? What does income tax shifts look like? To understand the budget allows you to then move the policies you want to see move. So I always think that people neglect sales or tax policy at their detriment in not understanding how it can move all of those other things. I mean, even things from, the classic sin taxes, how that drives purchase of alcohol products or not, and we have that discussion all the time in your world about, manufacturing inputs, things like that have been really critical policies. How do you make this an attractive place to make things? When it comes to the pyramiding of the tax that goes into the product. So
businesses make decisions based on economics, and tax policy is a massive part of that, right?
And there's a reason economic why certainty too. Like how much can I bet on that the legislature will continue my tax treatment going forward?
Do I invest in a extreme capital intensive investment of manufacturing in a state that I'm not sure what that policy is going to be in 5 years? Right. So that's been a success. You're right. And case studies are out there for how many states around us, what we can look at, what their tax policies have been that continue to flounder and struggle. And quite frankly, are one of our biggest economic drivers, right? People fleeing California, Again, constitutional mandate for California to balance the budget. They just don't. So our state does a good job with that. And you're right. Tax policy is not super exciting, but it is critical in driving the economy, and businesses make those decisions. They look at the corporate tax rate. They look at the individual income tax rate. They look at long-term policies. What are the trends? What's the job employment? When companies look at expanding here, we're not just talking about bringing new companies. We're talking about companies that say, well, we're going to invest millions of dollars in a new operation here. Will we do it here? Or we will do it in Texas. We'll do it in Kansas, North Carolina. And so we're continually competing for that. It's very hard to get to number one as a state. It's even more difficult to stay there.
Yes, especially because people just start copying your homework, figuring out the things that you're doing and seeing if they can do it too. But
Right.
anyway, so yes, I just always think don't get intimidated by the numbers. Dive in and understand tax policy.
Right. So we got a few minutes left. Let's talk about just a couple of specific bills or issues. Kate, on the local level with maybe our cities and counties, what's happened there to help our cities and counties help our manufacturing companies? We've got a couple of our member individuals who serve on city councils, and we're glad you guys choose to do that to help those cities understand what manufacturing does for them as well. But what are maybe a couple key points that you saw on
Sure.
that with that hat on?
So one of the big things, I'll give you two examples. One of the big things is, the inland port is potentially just a huge game changer for manufacturing, getting things in, getting things out to worldwide markets. And that has always been a contentious issue here in Utah because of the way it started. It started as a bit of a fight between Salt Lake City and the legislature. The mayor at the time, Jackie Biskupski, and the legislature had a kind of a contentious start to the state wanting to create an authority to do the inland port out in the Northwest quadrant. And so because of the way that started, it has been an annual bill and issue. This year, through some great breakthrough negotiations that took place that involved a tax increment that'll help build out the inland port. The state and Salt Lake City were able to reach this compromise spot that'll hopefully end all of this kind of contention and frustration and allow the inland port to finally launch. Critical to that are making this a very green inland port. And commitments of this tax increment that Salt Lake City will now receive back in control that will go back in to green efforts surrounding the port.
Right. Battery storage, alternative fuel vehicles, rooftop solar for manufacturing.
All kinds
of where the trend is going,
yes,
but gives an opportunity for those companies to look at that as an option.
Nudge, but the Salt Lake will contribute money back. The money they're going to receive back in control, they'll put back in there. And then hopefully in kind of the burying of the hatchet, if you will, of how this authority got started, that it'll finally launch and be this great economic engine for decades going forward for Utah's economy. The second one I'd mention is a bill dealing with what are known as retail incentives. So this is when a business is looking to locate in a city, what are the types of things the city can do to help them locate that business there? And there are oftentimes, if you're a newer city, or a growing city, so think of something like a Saratoga Springs or something like that. What you might do to attract business, and sometimes you will rebate property or sales taxes. Sometimes you'll help with infrastructure developments, things like that. If you're in an older, more established city, Salt Lake or Ogden, or even my hometown in Bountiful, what you might do in terms of a redevelopment, upsizing power systems or sewer lines or water lines, things like that, to accept a business and help make it so that piece of ground is attractive to locate there, bring those jobs, bring that sales tax base to the city. So major piece of legislation, HB 151, that was a probably almost a 9-month negotiation between the sponsor, Representative Mike Schultz, and cities to reach kind of a comfortable spot. And it dovetails with what Governor Cox has done in terms of realigning state incentives, wanting to make sure we go after the jobs with the highest pay, advanced manufacturing, different opportunities for rural Utah than perhaps the Wasatch Front. So this
living wage jobs, right?
Yeah. So this realigns some of those city incentives too, so that you can definitely still kind of assist with infrastructure and things like that. They do want to see some type housing components to
Mhm,
address, but this was a major piece of legislation, HB 151 on retail incentives with a lot of work on many sides to make sure that
Right.
as we retool and refine what it is we're doing to attract businesses, not just to the state of Utah, but to individual communities inside Utah, that we get that policy right.
Um, Billy, you and I spent a little bit of time on a couple of issues dealing with employer-employee relations. And something we always look at is the contract side of that. Our state has traditionally been pretty good at staying out of that relationship between an employer and an employee and allow the companies to uh, work on those relationships themselves. Our position has always been that our manufacturing companies know their employee base better than anyone, and they know what that relationship needs to be, and what they should address. The pandemic brought us some interesting dialogue and discussion. Most of our manufacturers were asked very early on to incentivize and encourage their employees to get the vaccine. We as an organization helped produce 2 million masks for the pandemic. And we continually worked with the state to help get through the pandemic. And then we saw kind of some changes in proposed legislation that, in my opinion, kind of drives a little bit of a wedge between the company and the employees, and do that. Talk just 30,000 foot level on kind of what we've seen with that.
Right. So I'll be quick, but let's jump back to last fall when we had the President Biden mandate,
Right.
for if your employees need to be vaccinated, and this was for large and medium sized businesses, or if they're not vaccinated, they need to be subject to testing.
Right.
And that was something that was very concerning to many businesses, that they didn't want to take on that extra burden and that responsibility. And it was a mandate, like you
Right,
say,
right.
on how you're going to treat your employees. And then the courts overturned that,
Mhm.
and the business community was against that.
Right.
Was against having that mandate. They wanted to be able to manage it
Right.
themselves.
A state or a federal mandate,
Right.
just
And
allow the
now-
companies to address it.
Now we jump to the session where I feel like the bill that you're referencing, that you're
Right.
bringing up, is a little bit of a reaction to what happened there.
Right.
That they wanted to go the other way. That we had legislators and a very engaged group of people that wanted to say, no vaccines, no,
Right.
businesses cannot do this. Businesses cannot in any way,
Right.
require. And they went even further than COVID. They went to any vaccines or any kinds of, health tests.
Right.
And then also went as far as saying, and we don't want you to be able to do incentives. We don't want
Right.
you to reward them for getting, a vaccine, or reward them for living a healthy life. I think
Right.
many of us are in companies that have wellness programs that
Right.
like lose a certain amount of weight, we're going to knock $50
Right,
off
right,
your
right.
premium a month or
Right.
whatever it might be. And they're saying, no, we don't want to do that. And my thought is, and I'm not in their heads, but that was a little bit of we didn't want this over here. So we're going to go all the
Right.
way over
Swing the
here.
pendulum back the other
But
way.
the problem is with business is still that same problem of, we think we know how to deal best with our employees.
Right.
We have that relationship with them. Don't mandate us on this side or that side.
Right.
Let us take care of it, and also let the market take care of it. If whatever one company chooses to do doesn't work for an employee, at least in the current market we're in, I'm pretty confident they'll be able to go
Right.
find another job somewhere else. And I know
Right.
that's easy to say right now.
Right.
And in
Well-
a different time, maybe that won't be so easy. But businesses song was always the same throughout
Right.
these two things: was let us handle it. You take care of making sure people are safe and have the government services they need. We'll take care of this aspect.
Yeah. And to your point, I think our businesses, again, they know their employees best. They know the types of policies and procedures, relationships that they have with those employees, and government inserting themselves into the middle of those relationships between business and employees is just not a good thing. And again, we don't like mandates at any level. Federal level, we don't like them at a state level. We think business does best when it has the freedom to make the decisions that are in the best interest of their company. They're the ones investing all the capital. They're the ones with all the risk, the liability, and all of those things. And so, creating a separate class and inserting themselves into those negotiations is just not a good thing.
So for those of you that are legislative nerds, go back and listen to those committee hearings from House Bill 60,
Right.
from Representative Brooks. Very interesting, lots of passion. I had someone lean next to me in the Senate committee hearing on that bill. It's like, oh, does having all these people in here make you uncomfortable? And I was like, no, I love their passion. I
Right.
love that they care.
Right.
Because there's so many times when we see bills that we go, more people ought to
Right.
have a
Right.
thought about this.
It's the process.
And it flies through.
Yeah,
And
this is the process.
I just wish we could get more groups to care about more of the bills.
More
And
tax policy.
yeah, like really, let's have a tax policy party. That's the. But I
We'll
love
work on that.
Love their passion, and I understand where they're coming from. But as the people we represent, our clients and your association, we just felt we can handle this. We
Right.
don't need government to do it.
Right. Let me just cover a couple little closing things. And one is air quality. We spend a lot of time following air quality bills. I've said this before. I chair the state's Air Quality Policy Advisory Board, which is a group of both legislators and private individuals from businesses and non-governmental organizations that look at policy for air quality. And everybody knows that's an issue for us in Utah. In a perfect world, we for a variety of reasons, we get a snowstorm about every 5 days during the winter, and we'd get even more powder than we get, and the air quality would be perfect if we could control the weather. So we spend a lot of time on air quality bills, things that address manufacturers' ability to permit, to continue to move forward with their operations. And so we tracked certainly a number of those bills. We had a bill in dealing with export and certification for some of our cosmetic manufacturing companies that Senator Bramble ran, which is a really good bill. And certainly in the state where we did a lot with nutraceuticals and those types of things, that was a really good bill for that industry in our state. Again, we talked about education funding, we talked about transportation funding, talked about budget, talked about air quality. We, as most of you know, we put together our legislative report, and it's on our website. And we encourage you to go in and look at those, click on the hyperlinks, see where our positions were. We tracked over 100 bills this year, and we continue to do that every year. We have a great group of colleagues like Billy and Kate who work with us on the Hill. And I've said before that I believe our legislative committee, that's made up of about 30 individuals, I would put that expertise and that experience up against anybody. We've got just an amazing group of people with just an amazing depth of knowledge on all the topics that business needs to pay attention to. And so we do track a lot of things that folks might say, well, why are you looking at that? Because it impacts business. And that's why we look at it, whether it's a tax policy or transportation, or whether we're looking at water law, rural issues, growth, economic development incentives, all of those things. So I want to say thank you to you guys for being here. I know this isn't what you wanted to do on as we get out of the session, is to dive back in and talk about it again.
We would have happily spent time with you. I mean, the last 7 weeks weren't enough. An 8th week was what we needed, Todd.
Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate that. And Billy didn't say that, so I guess we know where he stands.
I don't like family reunions that much.
Well, thank you for being with us here. We'll have this posted up on our website. And if you have questions about the legislative process, you have questions about specific bills, feel free to reach out to me. And we've been more than happy to walk you through that process. And again, successful session for 2022. And in a lot of cases, we play defense. Sometimes we play offense. But we're pleased, and we're very fortunate to live in a state that continues to value business, continues to value manufacturing. And we're committed as an organization to continue to help our legislators understand why that's so critical and why that's so important. So again, Todd Bingham, Utah Manufacturers Association, Billy Hesterman from Holland Hart, Kate Bradshaw from Holland Hart. You've been watching UMA on the Hill. Thanks again.